How do you mitigate your risk? Montel's forecasting services cover risks from hours ahead to years ahead. We welcome you to hedge your market exposure with our diverse forecasting portfolio. Contact us at sales@montelnews.com for more info and a free trial.
Hello listeners, and welcome to the Montel Weekly Podcast. Bring you energy matters in an informal setting. Today, I'm away from under my stairs and in the Montel office at headquarters. I'm Richard Sverrisson. Today we'll be talking about the extremely weak Nordic wholesale prices and what they mean for the region. How long will they last? What do they mean for investments? And PPAs, are the brakes on now? I'm joined today by Marius Holm Rennesund, Senior Analyst at Thema Consulting, and my colleague Olav Vilnes, Chief Editor Nordics at Montel. A warm welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
These are fairly dramatic times, are they not, Marius? We've seen very, very low spot prices, especially in the Oslo region.
Yes, we have. It's a very special situation indeed. We've never seen these levels before, and they seem to persist for some time as well. So it's going to be an interesting summer ahead and also an interesting fall.
Absolutely. So can you give us the reasons for the drop? I mean,
it's all weather related, basically. We've had a winter that has been very warm, so consumption's been low. At the same time, we've got a lot of precipitation, especially snow up in the mountains. And combined with that, we've also had a windy year, and we've also installed more wind capacity, so the wind power production has also increased. So we've got a combination of warm, windy and wet weather, which is kind of creating the perfect storm in the Nordic markets.
Could you put the current hydrological surplus in a historical perspective? I mean, some estimates that it's at 28 terawatt hours currently, down from around 40 in mid-April. How do you see this?
No, I mean, we're at levels we haven't seen before, and the snow, the amounts of snow up in the mountains has been extreme. We've seen 85 terawatt hours at the most, which is double the normal. So the producers have been really struggling to get rid of the water in the reservoirs to make room for what's coming down now as the melting period has started.
How long do you think we will continue to see single-digit spot prices?
No, I mean, looking at the market now, we must expect to see them throughout the summer months at least. This week, in a very special situation, the melting period really started now, and we've had outages on cables from southern Norway during the same period. So it kind of locks in that extreme power surplus we do have. And that has led to prices going down almost to zero. I think we had 1.6 yesterday. That's quite extreme. When some of that trade capacity comes up, some is coming up today. We also see more capacity next week. That will lead to a possibility of exporting more, which is a relief for the producers. But still, there's an extreme amount of snow that is melting and coming down in the reservoirs now.
I mean, 80 terawatt hours, I mean, that's immense. That's almost the total yearly consumption of Norway. It's not
exactly.
Far off. Yeah.
No. And we've also seen, I mean, looking at the reservoirs level, we started way above normal. And then, everybody has competed to be able to produce, and we went down and crossed the normal some weeks ago and almost went down to the minimum level because we need to make room for that water that is coming down during the melting period. And we saw a big jump again in the reservoir level the last week and see that the melting period now is actually happening. Because it was delayed a few weeks. It usually is when it's a lot of snow, then it starts to melt a bit later. And we've had a bit colder weather for some weeks, but now the warm weather has really hit most of the region.
Absolutely. So what's the likelihood of negative prices in Norway and in Sweden? There was some instances earlier this year.
Yeah, I mean, I think we still can see them in Sweden, especially in periods with a lot of wind power production as well. We have a lot of flexibility in the hydropower system in Norway. So, I mean, all the producers would like to avoid getting down there and rather restrict their production. But there's also limitation of more on the regulatory side to prevent flooding, etc. May force them to produce even in periods that they rather not want to. There is a chance that we even can get negative prices, but I don't think it's very large.
So that's also very much a rational choice question in a way that it's more rational for them to just let the water just run past the power plants than to risk the negative prices.
It is. I mean, there is a cost of producing as well, and you don't cover that cost when you see prices down towards zero, of course. So they would like to avoid that. On the other hand, flood prevention is one thing. It's also kind of a reputational burden with letting the water flow past the turbines. So that's also something that some of them might consider as well.
Of course, yeah. We focus very much on what it's the producer's view, but surely for industry and for the consumers, this is great news, is it not?
It is, at least for those who can actually enjoy the low prices. I mean, a lot of the large consumers also have locked in power prices in long-term contracts, so they don't get the full reward of the very low prices. But for much of the service sector, for households, smaller industries, etc., it's a very good period for them.
Well, we're sticking to prices, Marius. How quickly do you think we can see prices return to 2019 levels of close to 40 euros?
That's the big question, right? Because right now, the situation we've seen, the hydrological situation, the weather pattern is kind of overshadowing everything else. In the longer term, of course, the effects of the COVID virus will be an important factor going forward. What will happen to industry demand for power? So far, we've seen almost no effect in the Nordics. We've seen quite dramatic falls across Europe. Germany is down almost, around 10%. We've seen weeks in Spain and Italy being down 20%, maybe even more. Growing again now, but still, 15% below normal. And my fear is that will kind of affect the Nordic market later on when the auto industry is struggling in Germany and Hydro is still producing aluminium, maybe to stock up. But if that continues, they might need to slow production also in the Nordic. But so far, the situation up here in the Nordics looks good, but the recovery will be interesting to see. And everybody's talking about whether we'll get a V shape or a U shape or an L shape. And that's something that will determine also power prices going forward. There will be a few years before we see the 40 euro mark again in any case, I think. Another important factor is also that, this extreme weather scenario we've seen this year in the Nordics will likely see the downside more often than we used to do. Because we're building up a power surplus, and wet, windy years will push the power price further down than they did before. So it's at least before we get the new cables to UK and Germany, that will ease the situation somewhat. But the coming years, the downside is definitely larger than the upside on weather.
Do you see there, you also used to have the coal price like a marginal price setter in the Nordic region, which probably also explains this long-term expectations of 40, 50 euros. Now the gas prices have collapsed. Are they sort of taking over as the long-term guidance? And with the gas price fall, is that just... Does it mean we will still have very low prices now for years to come?
Yeah, I think definitely we'll see that gas prices will grow in importance. You see that coal-fired power is pushed out of the market, on market terms today. And going forward, the regulatory changes will lead in the same direction with the coal phase out in Germany, etc. So gas will definitely be becoming a more important fuel also for Nordic power. You have to also remember that the gas price we see currently, it's extremely low, and it's also driven by some of the same factors as the Nordic power price. We've had a very warm winter across Europe, and at the same time, we've built up a lot of LNG capacity. So there's definitely an oversupply, and the supply haven't been able to adjust to the situation we've seen during the winter. And gas prices also started to fall long before the coronavirus hit Europe. So I think although gas prices may stay low also going forward, they will definitely recover from the very low levels we're seeing currently.
And do you think then, carrying on from Olav's question, do you think that that's going to be what the Nordic market is going to look to as a price setter rather than traditionally it's been coal and the marginal cost of coal, but do you think gas is going to come to the forefront here and be more crucial?
Yeah, definitely. I think we have two steps here. The coming years, gas will become more and more important. And then going further out on the curve or beyond the traded curve, we will see that the long run marginal cost of new renewables will be the price anchor. So from having a situation where coal has been the most important fuel, gas will be in the medium term, and then cost of renewables or different also kinds of flexibility in Europe in the very long term. We've used to a market where where the supply side is really where you have the flexibility, adjusting up and down the hydropower or gas fired in Europe. I think hydrogen might play a more important role in the very long term in Europe, and also more kind of traditional supply demand side flexibility. Will be more important.
Such as
being able to switch up and down your regular consumption with batteries, electric cars. You actually get paid to slow down your consumption. More infrastructure cables will also lead to that flexibility. And I think hydrogen will be, or we in Thema at least believe that hydrogen will be important. Green hydrogen, where you can produce hydrogen based on renewable sources when you have excess production. And you can bring some of that back to the power sector when you don't produce enough power from renewables.
Yeah, you had a good example there in Denmark. Last week, there's a big project going on in outside of the Bornholm Island. You see more of those hydrogen projects now coming in the 10-year term, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, it's a question of cost, first and foremost. You need to get the cost down. And there's also a question about the business models to being used. I mean, in new technologies, you would like to have some certainty in both your cost and your income side. So many are looking at stable power load and doing PPAs maybe. But what's really needed is to use some of that flexibility and rather use the spot market, so you can produce very cheaply when power is virtually zero priced, and then bring it back again into the market at high priced hours.
Sorry, if I can just interrupt there, Marius, I'm intrigued to know what, the demand side measures, batteries, hydrogen, etc., even cables. What will that do to prices and price volatility? I mean, will it flatten them out? Will it decrease that? Because now, I mean, some days are crazy volatile, and purely on the basis of wind and solar or hydro production. So what would the impact be there on this increased flexibility?
Well, it's going in a way both ways. I think we definitely will see large volatility going forward, and the different technologies are used in different ways and in different time frames. I think we'll see batteries most on the very short time frames, the intraday to move consumption a few hours. Hydrogen, you can store for longer periods of time. There will probably also be a market that is larger than in the power sector, outside of the power sector, for transport, industries, etc. So that will serve more as a hydro reservoir in a way, and at least a way that you can move more energy over longer time periods. It will definitely increase volatility to get all these unregulated new production in forms of unregulated hydro, wind, and solar. But storage technologies, both in forms of batteries and hydrogen, will kind of lower some of that volatility again, because you're able to soak up the excess production in hours where renewable production is extremely high. So that will lift prices somewhat in those hours. And it will lower the extreme peaks in other hours when you have too little production.
So it's a more sort of extreme version or a more permanent solution to what we've seen happening to solar. Yeah. The solar in the midday peaks where it's just flattened out those price peaks. So it's a similar kind of idea.
It's a similar kind of idea.
I think we'd like to move discussion onto PPAs. I think that's a very interesting environment now. But just before we go there, Marius? I mean, do you think that the low prices now that we're seeing in the Nordic market are holding back investments?
So far, we haven't really seen that. We expected investments to be flattening out, at least in Norway now, when we come to a close on the investment period and the certificate system, although that didn't mean that much because prices are so low now. But there was a really large push to get online by the end of 2021. We expected it to slow down after that. When we're now also seeing the growing opposition and a revision of the licensing system, that also dampens the willingness to invest. So far, we've seen new projects making final investment decisions, both in Norway and Sweden. But it's going to be interesting whether these rather short-term fluctuations or low price period will mean that you slow down investments. I think it also depends a bit on who is investing. The typical utilities who haven't been very active in especially onshore wind, they're more used to handling these wet years. I mean, it happens every once in a while and has for decades. So they're more used to that. To financial investors that doesn't know the power market as well as some of the utilities, that might be a bit more frightened. And you also always see that the forward market is very adaptive. So even prices 3-4 years ahead are moving down when you have a wet year, which is fundamentally not right.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
But I've also heard some talks in the market of companies trying to renegotiate their PPA deals because of this year's price fall has sort of made some of the long-term analysis also getting lower for 2025, 2030. So that they are now, have you seen that there are some renegotiations going on?
No, not that I've been aware of, but I mean, nobody wants to show us their price in the contracts anyway. But of course, we read some news that prices have fallen in the PPA market as well. So it's going to be interesting to see going forward. I think one issue that's been there for a few years is that our analysis and most other analysts' analysis as well has showed long-term prices above the forward market. And now you see the forward market even lower. Of course, we've also adjusted down our short-term, medium-term price projections somewhat, but they might be more aware of the downside when they've actually seen it happening.
Because there's been some voices in the market will say I've been critical to the fact that analysts always price, especially in terms of in the context of PPAs, price way above market prices or previously captured prices. So, I mean, what's your view there? I mean, I'm putting you on the spot a bit here, Marius, because you are an analyst, maybe
course.
With some of those types of papers that you put out. But.
Yeah, I mean, we're still above the market, and I have some problems really explaining why the market is so low going a few years ahead as well. So I think we still are priced above. We've had interesting discussions with a lot of investors and clients, and there's obviously no clear answer to that. There's different opinions and different arguments. But, we feel comfortable with those assumptions we make and are open on them and the fundamental price level that leads to, basically.
Fair enough, absolutely fair enough. If I understand it correctly, the PPA market, if we can call it a market or a sector, was slowing down before COVID-19 struck. But now, what's happened during the coronavirus time? Do you expect things to pick up afterwards, or will it take some time?
I think it will take some time, and I think we'll see, with or without the COVID-19 virus, we'll see changes to that market. What we've seen so far is a lot of large players on the demand side going in, large aluminum companies, data centers, etc. And you don't have too many of those. So for some of the large players in key sectors, they maybe bought what they need for quite some time. So what we saw also before is restructuring of how you do PPAs. If you have a large wind project, which was very attractive a year or two ago, now you would rather make 2 or 3 PPAs out of that volume than going towards one customer with a large PPA.
What's the reason for that? More flexibility, or
more flexibility and the ability also for smaller players to do PPA. The market for the Alcoas and Facebook and Google may be saturated, so you have to look for different kind of consumers. So that might lead to smaller volumes in the PPAs.
And you mentioned the levelized cost of energy for wind power. Where is it now? Is it like 30 euros or you see it moving down into the 20s?
The onshore wind, I mean, is moving fast. The cost has been moving quite fast down the last few years. I think eventually we'll see a slowdown in that. So it's rather the 30s than the 20s now. We hear about PPAs being done below 30 as well, but most of them are maximum 10 years. And the investor is rather making money on the volume above the PPA that they put into the market and the volumes beyond the 10 years of the PPA.
Where is the main hesitation in PPAs, or where's the main uncertainty? Is it on the supplier side, the utility, the developer, and the corporate side? Where do you see it, or is it across the board?
I think it's across the board. When situations like the one we're in right now happens, of course, it increases uncertainty at all levels. We see that projects has been moving forward. The investor or utility starts to hesitate. I mean, what is the new normal is basically what they're asking, because they understand that, this is short-term period with very low prices, but has something fundamentally changed so that you will see a new and lower normal going forward. And I guess the thoughts on the demand side is basically the same. If I can do a better deal by waiting 6 months, a year, I'll rather wait.
Yeah, of course.
I mean, I can go out in the market and source really cheap power today anyway.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, what are your expectations of future balancing costs? I mean, that's an important part of any PPA deal. I mean, for example, in Finland, what would your be assumptions here?
I mean, we don't have a standard valuation of the balancing markets. I think what's going to be interesting going forward is back to the technology side again. If you get cheap batteries in that can even out some of that volatility and be used in the balancing markets, I think we will see price levels much below what we see today. So the question is, for the hydropower, will they get the increased competition from other technologies going forward? I think that's one of their fears.
And what about financing here? Have the negative prices we discussed earlier, I mean, have they sort of scared off banks from lending money to these projects?
It's difficult to say. I mean, many of the banks that has been present in the market for quite some time, again, they're like the utilities. They've been here. They know that, we will see wet years, windy years occasionally and kind of keep the long-term view. But of course, uncertainty again definitely increases. What is the new normal, I guess, is also the question they pose. So it might be more difficult also to get the financing. And that's also one argument that we could see more investments by utilities rather than foreign funds that need project finance. Maybe you will get back to the way we used to finance the hydropower projects.
Interesting. This is a fascinating area, Marius, and we could talk at length about this, but there's certain areas that we haven't even touched upon. But we'd love to discuss with you again, and it's great to have you on the pod as ever, Marius. So thank you very much for joining us today. I think we've been adopting very clearly social distancing here. Yeah. We've kept a meter and a half apart from each other. Just so you know, listeners, we're not all tucked in here. But thank you, Marius. Thank you, Olav, and that's all for us this week. Remember to keep up to date with all our stories on Montel News. Follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn. Subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. Thank you and goodbye.